Hello and welcome to the Voice of TOD. I'm Tom, and in this video we're going to talk about Black Widow, the 2020 movie that has finally been released. And with Loki being a bit of a disappointment so far, with one episode to go, is Black Widow going to be enough to get me invested in the MCU Phase 4? Let's find out. There will be slight spoilers in this review, nothing about the story or the revelations, but I will touch on smaller elements. There are little nods to the Disney Plus shows in this movie as well, but nothing that breaks, for me anyway, the continuity of where this would sit in the MCU. If you want to go into this movie completely clear of spoilers, I hope you come back and finish watching this review after you've seen it. The film is directed by Kate Shortland of Somersault fame, and written by Jack Schaefer of WandaVision and Ned Benson, The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby, with the screenplay by Eric Peterson of Thor Ragnarok and Godzilla vs. Kong fame. The movie stars, you probably gathered this one, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow / Natasha Romanoff, Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova, David Harbour as Alexei Shostakov or the Red Guardian, and Rachel Weisz as Melina Vostokov, and a few other familiar faces that I won't be revealing here. The IMDb synopsis: a film about Natasha Romanoff in her quests between the films Civil War and Infinity War. Well, that tells us when it takes place, so with the admin out the way, let's get in. We kind of have to start about my initial thoughts before I saw this movie. Black Widow is a character that I love. She's probably my third favourite character in the MCU, just behind Captain America. And with her being one of the oldest characters in the MCU, obviously her first movie being Iron Man 2 all the way back in Phase 1, we really should have had this solo outing from her long before now, and that is one of the biggest failings of Marvel. You could have done so much with her character, but they chose to hold out until this point, after we know her fate with the MCU saga and the end of Endgame. But this is set as a prequel of sorts to Infinity War, and I don't see any excuse as to why this movie wasn't released between Civil War and Infinity War. This is clearly a Phase 3 movie, and there are a couple of nods to things in the Disney Plus shows, but nothing that breaks the flow. If you insert this movie into the timeline between, it will probably be Civil War and Black Panther, it works absolutely fine, and the tiny little nods, there's one nod that I picked up on to some of the revelations in Falcon and Winter Soldier, and it's a throwaway comment by one of the characters that if you hadn't seen Falcon and Winter Soldier, you would just think, oh, it's made up. It really doesn't break anything. This film should have come out 5 years ago. It probably wouldn't have been made this way, and certainly the post-credit scene is set after the events of Endgame. But there's no excuse for this to have been delayed and delayed and delayed for so long. That being said, I did go into this with an open mind, having seen a few of the trailers, and amazingly they didn't ruin anything for me. I actually had a lot of fun with this. The film is split into two clear halves. The first sets up Widow and Yelena in a set of sequences that obviously take cues from the Bourne Identity, which isn't a bad thing. I love the Bourne series. The action is again very Bourne-esque, with the close, quick cuts and a driving sequence that is very much a merging of the Paris scene in the Bourne Identity and the MCU budget. We get the family, no, we're not doing Fast and Furious, back together, and from that point the story really kicks up into the MCU superhero high gear. Again, we're sticking with the spy vibe in a way, but to me it felt like it went full James Bond style big villain secret lair kind of idea. It sounds really corny and uninspired, but I really enjoyed how it all played out. and at just over 2 hours, this movie kept me entertained and held my attention throughout. Both Johansson and Pugh give great performances throughout, and I really enjoyed their relationship and the dialogue. I really felt that sisterly vibe that the trailers have showed us, and with them being the two central characters in this movie, I loved what I saw. I think their presence together was excellent. David Harbour works really well as Red Guardian, a character I know nothing about, and while the story doesn't really use him in a very interesting way, he has one or two moments where he shines, but overall, I'm a fan of David Harbour and I really enjoyed him in this movie. He does have quite a lot of constant comparisons to Captain America and himself, and honestly there's a lot to love with his character, despite what the story does with him. Rachel Weisz doesn't really have a huge role in this, but again, we have 4 actors with Johansson, Pugh, Harbour and Weisz who really know how to hold people's attention when they're on screen. I don't think she gives an amazing performance, I don't think she has a huge amount to work with, but she is a very key character to Widow's past, and I do like how they use her and Widow together at times, the confrontations between them, and the overall, again, between the 4 of them, the chemistry is excellent, I can't fault it. Like I said, 4 very good actors, and you get your money's worth here. We also get a couple of action scenes where we see the Widows, I guess they're called, in action. I actually really like the idea of this elite assassin squad of Widows just being in the shadows and twisting events and making governments fall or whatever they do at the whims of whoever controls them, I guess. I really like what we saw. We probably won't get anything like that again. Certainly not in the MCU with... well, it doesn't really focus on the villains that way, usually. But I enjoyed what we got, and I think it adds more depth to the film, and it shows the Widow program as being the threat that you always kind of gathered it would be. Certainly with somebody like Black Widow, and the references that she's made throughout it's mostly been the Avengers films, but you can see why she's as good as she is. There are 2 places where this movie falls down for me though. The first is the big villain, and the second, sadly, is Taskmaster. The villain is easy to explain, it's just really tropey and tired. It's not that it's bad, it's just uninspired. Taskmaster is a whole nother issue. The choreography of the fights are great. The action throughout this entire film is really solid. And I loved how the Taskmaster went from one Avengers fighting style to another, the variety of weapons that's used, constantly adjusting and improving, very much like Winter Soldier in Cap's second movie. And again, I don't know much about Taskmaster, but I don't like how they handled the character here. It doesn't break anything for me because I have no connection to the comics. But as an outsider looking in, I think there were many other ways that they could have gone about using Taskmaster, and I'd be very interested to see how fans of Taskmaster and the the Marvel Comics stories react to the use in this film. While the story is very much as you'd expect, the script is quite fluid and enjoyable. The action sequences are excellent, from smaller scale stuff to the big set pieces that you expect from a modern MCU movie. While there is very much a nod to other spy franchises, rather than doing anything new, this is a lot of fun, and the epitome of a summer blockbuster. I've mentioned that this movie could have been released between Civil War and Infinity War, but the one post-credit scene here is set in the current MCU present post-Endgame. I won't say what it is, but I do like what it's pointing to. It's not enough to get me excited for Phase 4, when that finally kicks off with Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings later this year. Do we even know if Shang-Chi is set post-Endgame? I mean, that could be set anywhere in the timeline, I guess. and I'm still very much out of the overall MCU, with my interest only being in a couple of movies rather than the bigger picture and the overlapping story that they try and tell. But I can see myself watching Black Widow again. It's a very easy and enjoyable superhero action movie that Scarlett Johansson has nothing to be embarrassed about. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Voice of TOD for more movie and game news, reviews, and whatever else I feel like talking about. I've got a couple of other movie reviews in the works, and as there's no football tomorrow, I think we'll do a live stream with some Halo Reach, because I've been saying it for a while. It's time to get playing that game again. So stay tuned for more content, and as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.